Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast where a behavioral scientist examines what it's like to live a humorous life. Glimpse into the lives of the funniest people in entertainment, business, and science as your host, Dr. Peter McGraw, explores their habits, motivations, and secrets to success. Get ready to fire up your brain and your funny bone. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast that looks at the lives of funny people. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is comedian, writer, presenter, and podcaster Wil Anderson. Welcome, Wil.
I always feel weird when there's words after comedian. I always think that should just do it. You know, it should just be Wil Anderson, comedian.
Yes.
But for some reason, people are like, you're a writer. I'm like, well, I just wrote comedy.
You're a podcaster, but yeah. I just talk about comedy.
It's a comedy podcast. I'm creating comedy. You're the one who's putting labels on this, but yes, it does sound impressive once you put a few slashes in there, I suppose.
This was on your Wikipedia page, so I figure it's 90% accurate.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's hope so.
So actually, this is perfect for my first question, which is if you weren't working as a comedian / podcaster, presenter, what would you be doing?
I mean, it's hard. I think these days, there is no reason that you wouldn't be working as a comedian. You know, I mean, when I first started here, 22, 23 years ago, it was a really conscious choice to be a comedian. I was running away to join the circus.
Okay.
And, it was an industry that was full of gatekeepers of various different kinds, whether it be at the local room, you're running to do well enough to get onto the lineup and then do well enough to get to the next level gig. And at every aspect of that, maybe you get into the radio or the television or the newspaper or any of those various ways that you would get an opportunity. At every level of that, there were gatekeepers in the way.
Okay.
Whereas these days, you can make something funny in your bedroom and put it out on the internet and people can see it all over the world. So one of the funniest people I know in the entire world is a guy who does a podcast called The Weekly Planet.
Okay.
And his name is Nick Mason. Okay. And he drives a tram.
Okay.
He's not a professional stand-up comedian. He doesn't do gigs. He doesn't work on radio or television. He has a podcast where they talk about comic books, and he is one of the funniest, quickest witted people that I've ever heard in my entire life. So regardless of what I was doing, I would hope that, we live in a world now where even if I were driving a tram for a living, you still have an opportunity to make comedy and put comedy out to the world. Maybe I'd be a farmer. My parents are farmers and their parents are farmers and my brother is a farmer.
Okay.
So my dad lives on the road that he was born on.
Okay.
He has lived on that road for nearly 75 years.
Okay.
His father built a house on that road. My mother's parents lived on a intersecting road to that. My brother lives on the same block of land that my dad does and they farm that land together. Okay. So, there's a chance that perhaps I never would have left there, that I would have stayed at home and built a different life, But look, I have soft hands and I enjoy indoor work. If I'm going to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, it's not going to be to milk cows. It's going to be to do breakfast radio when somebody brings you a latte, so I think that I probably would have found my way to comedy in some way. I didn't always, it's funny, isn't it? At the time, what I would have told you when I was a person who was 17 or 18 was that I would have been happy to be involved in any aspect of comedy.
Okay.
That I just wanted to be around.
You could have been
comedy.
A booker.
Could have been a booker. I could have been a manager. I could have been an improv performer. I could have been somebody who ran my own venue and put the best comedians in the world through there. And there's still a part of me that, you always have your escape plans. What am I going to do when people stop being interested in what I do now? And one of those has always been, I would love to run a night or a venue or a place where I could put on comedy that I like, that I'm not necessarily performing, and curate something, create something, make a space for other people to be creative and to be, because I am one of those comedians who loves watching comedy and enjoying other people's comedy. There's some comedians who don't like to watch other people. They don't like to be influenced. They don't like that idea that they might pick up, a joke or an idea.
Oh, right,
and look, of course, there is that danger in that. But I enjoy watching other people, perform and take risks, and I'm inspired by their creativity and what they do. So I think that I probably would have found a way to be around comedy regardless. However, all that said, that's what I would have told you back then. Okay. If I'm being brutally honest, I think that I probably always knew that I desired to be a performer. Okay. Like that I desired to write and produce comedy that I could perform for myself. And the fact that in 23 years of doing it, I've never written for anyone else.
Is that right?
Never. Wow. Never written for anybody else. I've never had anyone else write for me. I mean, on my television show, I work collaboratively with some people, but I haven't desired at any stage to be doing other people's work, and I certainly haven't desired to be producing work for other people. Okay. If I am going to write something, if I'm going to create something, it's always with the point of view that I will be the person performing that thing as well. So I think that I was probably lying to myself and everybody is my answer. I think that what I am doing now is probably more accurately what it is that I thought and hoped that I might do.
And you were on this was a dairy farm?
Dairy farm. About 250 people total, okay. No shops or anything. Okay. Nearest town was about 15 kilometres away, so 10 minutes in the car, uh-huh. And that had about 1,200 people. Okay. And then the kind of next biggest town where I went to high school was about 12,000 people. Okay. So really, in the grand scheme of things, very small, And yes, dairy, milking, 250 cows twice a day, every day.
And you were, I assume, if you're a child on a farm, you start farming early. You get a work ethic. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that, I've been very aware of in my career is that I am not talented enough to not work hard. Okay. If you're looking at a competitive advantage, why is it that, I've managed to build a career out of telling jokes to people? Mm-hmm. For some people, the reason that they managed to build a career out of telling jokes to people is that they are just so brilliantly funny and amazing that you can't contain it. Yeah. Chappelle basically in his last special said, "I'm just so good at this." Right.
Some people, as John Cleese would say, is bring funny to the table, uh-huh. Right? They arrive funny. Okay. I'm not an arrive funny guy. Okay. In fact, to be honest, if you see me with my friends and my, my out of comedy life, mm-hmm. then you would probably not pick me as being the person who, makes a living telling jokes to
You
people.
Were not funny on the elevator ride up here.
I was not. And I don't know if I've been funny so far in this podcast. You didn't tell me at the start that I had to.
No, you don't actually.
Yeah, it's a free podcast. I'm a professional funny man. But it is one of those things where I think, increasingly as I am professionally funny, mm-hmm. I am less and less funny in the rest of my life because, you don't want to take your work home with you. Okay. But I don't think that I was ever particularly, that classic class clown or anything. Mm-hmm. I've always loved comedy, but I always knew that I had to take that farmer's work ethic, to doing it as a job, which was, so the thing about, comedy as opposed to farming, right? Uh-huh. Is that if I have a bad gig, particularly early on, there might be a week or 2 weeks until you do another one. Right. And you'll just obsess about, how you did and go over it a million times in your mind. If you are a farmer and you have a bad, milking, if that can be the case, right. You still this cow's still got to be milked again 5 o'clock the next morning. Yes. It doesn't matter. Regardless, you still got to get up and you still got to milk the cows and you still got to do it again that afternoon. And certainly as a comedian, there's been many a times where I've reminded myself of that. Uh-huh. It doesn't matter what happened. You've still got to get up and milk the cows tomorrow. So, and the nice thing about, the difference between comedy and, milking cows is, now I've got to a point where, you can send a younger comedian out. You can't do that as a farmer. You can't send a younger farmer out to warm up the cows for you, right. Get them in the right mood before you come out and milk them. Right. People don't applaud when you get to work as a farmer. Right. So.
Did you not like milking cows? You said you have soft hands. Was that a joke or are you really just sort of like, that just wasn't your... I mean, I can't imagine a lot of people love the labor per se,
I think there's something about it that I think if it were only milking cows, there's something about that. Because the truth of it is that milking cows is really just an exercise in doing something over and over again. You know, there's not actually much milking anymore. There's not a stool and pigtails or anything like that.
Yes.
You know, it's a rotary machine. Cows get on one side. And these days, I mean, I've been back to the farm because it's my dad and my brother's running joke that at every Christmas they offer that I could get up the next morning and go and milk the cows. And there was a point where I could have done that, 20 years ago. I could have gone and milked the cows, but I would walk into their dairy now and I wouldn't know how to use any of the equipment because all the cows are microchipped now. They get on the milking machine. It's all hooked up to a computer. There's none of this random thing anymore where, a cow would come around and they weren't milked out, so you'd send them around again. The cows stop being milked by the machine the
moment they have no milk.
And they have no milk, so I wouldn't know how to do that. A lot of it's computer programs and, spreadsheets and stuff like that. But I used to like there was a part of milking cows that I really liked, which was that it's a very simple task, really, once you know how to do it. And there's a repetitive nature to it that is, meditative, but it is not boring because you have to have an awareness. Like you have to be aware if a cow's going to kick or if they're being upset or if perhaps they have some, you're looking out for an infection they might have or any of these sort of things. The other thing is, 4:00 in the morning, you're looking for their tail to go up because if their tail goes up, that means something is about to come out from where the tail formerly was and you have to step out of the way.
Indeed, yes.
So there's enough of that sort of meditative process to it that you can have time to think and, consider the world and all these sort of things that I enjoy to do. But there's enough of an awareness of having to do something that you don't become bored by the tasks that you're doing.
Right.
In the same way as sometimes when I'm writing, the best thing that I can do, I can sit down at the desk for hours working on a bit. And then I'll go and clean the pool. I'll just go and get some leaves out of the pool for 20 minutes and it'll all fall into place because what you really need to do is now let your brain work in that way where if your body's kind of half concentrating on something else, your brain starts working in a different way to when you're sitting down in front of your desk sort of concentrating on the problem. So milking, I think, was that bit of it. If it was only milking,
then
I think I'd be okay. The rest of it is much harder.
So this may sound strange to you, Will, because this farmer's work ethic is interesting to me because I've told stories to people about you, which may seem weird because we've only met each other twice before today kind of thing. And one of them is real. And the second one, I want to find out if it is real or not.
Nice. I love this. This is great.
So the first one
I'm probably the worst person to ask, by the way.
So we actually, the second time we met, you were kind enough to sit on a science versus comedy panel when we were launching the Humor Code. At Pal's bookstore in Portland, Oregon. And so I had done those panels several times before. And normally what happens, and for people who so it's basically me and maybe my co-author Joel Warner would sit with 2, 3, or 4 comedians, and then a moderator would ask questions about comedy. And it's a tremendously entertaining event. The audience loves it. There's lots of laughs. The comedians are showing off. And then you also cover sort of interesting topics, including like what makes things funny and so on. And normally I destroy the comedians in these debates. And the reason is simple, not because I'm smarter or anything else, but I just had years of reading, writing, experimentation. I wrote the book on this thing.
Yeah, you've worked out the arguments previous to the conversation.
That's right.
Happened.
Yes. So it's rigged. The whole thing's rigged for it to be an entertaining affair, but for us to look good. And I was expecting that to happen at Pal's. And our moderator starts asking questions, and you start answering those questions. And my words are coming out of your mouth. I don't know if you remember this. And I'm like, shit, this guy is killing it. And the event, the audience didn't care, didn't matter, in any other way. It was a great event. And I came up afterwards and I said, Will, you read the book, didn't you? And you're like, oh yeah, mate. I picked it up. I read it on the plane on the way over here. And which was a first. Like, as I said, you were the only comedian that I've ever done this with who prepped. And you prepped in the perfect way. You read the handbook and then you shined. You were by far the funniest and smartest person on the stage as a result of that. And that always sort of stuck with me as like, oh, this is a guy who's a professional in the way that a lot of comedians aren't always. No. So that's the first story. And I tell that story a lot and people get a kick out of it.
I'll quickly speak to that if you want to.
Yeah.
So, look, firstly, it comes from that idea we were already discussing, which is I think that I need to be bringing something extra to the table.
Okay.
Secondly, I think that my humor is always at its best, where I feel like I've done all the work.
Okay.
And then I can listen.
Okay.
Because I think that, comedy exists in two very distinct modes, and I think often we forget about one of them, which is listening.
Okay.
Comedy is as much about listening as it is about talking. Even stand-up comedy, where I'm the only person talking, I have to constantly remind myself the audience will tell you everything you need to know if you just listen to them. What they're liking, what they're not liking, whether you should be talking more about that bit, whether you should be talking less about that bit. A lot of people will say to me, I'm not a comedian who ever has a set list, but I will do all the preparation of all the millions of things that I could talk about. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to go to something and launch into a bit about how I don't like going to the gym, and then suddenly I discover I'm in a room full of people who clearly love going to the gym, and I've still got 4.5 minutes left on this gym bit that I'm now pushing uphill, like much more than I ever push any weights uphill at the gym. So I like the idea that I'm fully prepared.
Yes.
And then the competitive advantage is
and you can improvise.
Listening, right? Because if you listen to what someone says rather than trying to jam in your pre-prepared line or joke or looking for that opportunity to tell that joke. So it was something I learned from doing panel shows very early on in this country, because that was where sort of I started to break out into people knowing who I was doing these news comedy panel shows.
Okay.
And the trick that I always saw was these people would come in and they would have, other comedians, they'd have the 4 or 5 jokes they wanted to get into the show, and they'd have them on a piece of paper in front of them, and you'd often even see them looking down to see what, and you could tell they weren't listening to and the bits that would fly on these shows were not the bits where someone jammed in a pre-prepared joke, but when someone recognized that there was a moment happening, that something fun was happening, or that you could react off it. You have to do all the work so that you're confident enough that you can then throw it all away. And, cricket is probably not the best of all analogies to use to an international audience, but there was an Australian captain of our national cricket side, which pretty much, they call it the unofficial prime minister in this country, is the captain of the Australian cricket side. His name was Steve Waugh, and he was like an idol of mine, absolute idol of mine. And I asked him when I was interviewing him, I said, when the West Indians at their peak were bowling to you at 185 kilometres an hour and you've got 22 yards, to decide what shot to play, how do you possibly decide what shot to play? Okay. And he said, you can't. You can't decide in that split second, whether to hit over here or in the air over here or along the ground over there. He said, you have to do all the training and then you have to get out there and you have to trust your instincts. Okay. You have to get out of your own way once you're out. Let all the training take over. Let the preparation take over. So I didn't come to that thing going, here are the, 5 parts of this book that I'm going to bring up. Right. I read the book and then I listened to the questions and I answered the questions. Right. Right? Right.
But so that to me, that stuck with me because, you were ready in a way that I was ready, but I wasn't expecting it. And it's a much better story than if it had gone like every other one.
Right. Yeah.
Now, the other thing.
Okay, what's the other one?
So I have this vision, I spoke to one of your old friends too, and she was telling me some stories. I have this sort of very Hemingway-esque view of you. And it goes something like this. You enjoy life. You may go out, you may get after it, have some drinks, have some fun, whatever. But the next morning, you're up and working in the way that Hemingway, despite his shenanigans, was up writing the next day, no matter how hungover he was. This fits your farmer's work ethic idea. You got to get up and milk the cows, regardless of if you're hungover or you're sick or you're tired or whatever it is. And I'm going by, and so this story fits. Someone told me, and this might be my bad memory, is that when you're on the road, you carry 2 bags, one bag with clothing and one bag with materials.
Well,
is that sort of true? And you set those.
That's an extrapolation of probably what the truth is more like these days, where particularly with computers and technology,
I guess you don't need piles of materials.
But yes, certainly there was a point where I would be traveling with piles of materials, newspaper articles that I
and you would set them up in your hotel room to be able to work on them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, that is true. Well, yes. It's an extrapolation.
Okay,
it's a much
more romantic.
But yes, there is certainly an element of that when I was traveling, work's always first. Like I'm going somewhere to work. But, I also think that part of the reason that I was drawn to the world of comedy, particularly when I joined the world of comedy, here it was a generation behind where it was at in America. So when I started here, you're really talking about an industry that was establishing itself, not something like, these days in Australia, to be honest, if you said to your parents at 18, I'm going to go into comedy as an industry, they go, okay. It's a good industry, you can make a lot of money. It's a well-established industry in this country. There's festivals everywhere.
It's valued.
I see comedians on the radio, on the television, writing newspaper articles all the time. That seems like a job that people have. You go and do that job, Whereas when I did it, it was not like that at all. And part of what I liked about the job was that for this kid who'd grown up in the country with a dad who's never had a drink of alcohol in his life, never smoked a cigarette, married the first woman he ever kissed. I'm not that person. My dad has lived on the same road all his life, and I have been someone who, has loved to use my work and my opportunities to explore the world, but not just to explore the world, in a kind of literal sense, as in like getting on a plane and going places, although that has been part of it, but to explore, the nature of what it means to be a human being, whether that is in an intellectual way,
right.
Where, to try to read and understand what it is that other people think life is about, but also to experience some of those things, to try those things, drugs is the obvious example that you go to in this situation. But, for me, my parents probably would be, worried about the way that I've used drugs in my life.
Okay.
But I've never been worried about the way that I've used drugs in my life. They've always been part of, a broader experimentation that's going on within my mind and my body about the limits of who we are as human beings and what motivates us and what makes us feel good and not feel good. And, the understanding of the difference between those things and the understanding of consequences for actions and, that with highs come lows and all those sort of things that those experiences have taught me. But I will say also that I'm very cognizant of the fact that I've not been drinking for a few months, and for me, drinking had become a regular part of performing.
Okay.
And then I was like, well, that's not for any good reason, is it?
Okay.
That's just because you have become so comfortable with this that you enjoy, you might as well have a couple of beers while you're doing it. But now that it's become something that you do as 100% habit and expectation rather than something that you're doing as a treat, are you doing it as an enabler? Has your doing of your job become something that could not exist without you drinking?
I see.
Right?
Yeah.
So then, to me, the minute I sort of had that, revelation or felt like that was the case, I decided, well, for this show, I'm going to, see if I can do it without drinking and just see how that feels and see if I'm still connecting, with the material in the same way and with the performance aspect of it the same way. And it may well be something that I, at some stage, go back to and go, well, this is actually, I prefer it the other way. But I feel like those things they can be in our industry. They can become inexorably linked to each other. You know, particularly I found when I was touring America, I'm in a strange town every week.
Mm-hmm.
So for those people, you're the new person in town. So, you know, every week's Christmas holidays, you know, every week's New Year's Eve, you know, like everyone wants to take you out. You know, you're at comedy clubs where they'll, you know, refill your drinks. And if you want to sit around and drink with the staff, you know, into the wee hours out of the night, you can. You don't really have anything to do the next day. So there's no excuse not to in a way. So I think, but there's a point where some of that's fun. And then some of it you go, well, is this really what, you know, I want the other half of my life that isn't the bit on stage to look like. So I think it's one of those things where I'm always with any of those things, and with comedy itself as well, which is checking in on what your relationship with something is. Mm-hmm. Because it can be the same with comedy. What's my relationship with comedy like at the moment? Am I overstressed about it? Am I, like, you know, one of the things we're as we speak, I'm 2 days away from debuting a new show. I've been working on this show for 8 months, which is the longest lead time probably I've ever had on a show.
Okay. My
major problem with it is it's still probably twice as long as it should be, and I don't know what to cut out, which is the greatest problem you could ever have in your entire life.
Right.
But the other night, I found myself being so, like, I noticed it. I'm like, oh, you've been a bit short with people. You're starting to stress about things you don't normally stress about. What's that about? Where's that coming from?
Okay.
And I'd forgotten, because this is the thing you do with comedy all the time, is the problem with writing a show every year is that your last show of your previous tour is so close to the first show of your new tour that you go into the new tour thinking it should feel like how the old tour finished.
Which you need 8 months or 5 months to get it.
I've been doing that show 100 times.
Right.
Of course it feels great.
Yeah.
I've got every bit of it going. And you remember back to when you did it the first night and it was still fun, but it wasn't anything like what it ended up being.
Yes.
Perfection is this idea that, like, you know, on the first night it should be perfect. Nothing that I have ever done has been perfect. I can't look back on anything and go, well, that was perfect. Mm-hmm. I nailed that. And even sometimes in comedy, you can have a joke that's perfect, but the world will change around you, and then the joke becomes not perfect anymore because comedy doesn't exist without context. Right. So if the context changes, a perfect joke can suddenly not be a perfect joke anymore. You've got to remember, somebody once said to me, it's like, you've been living on this, luxurious island. Okay. And, there's swimming pools and, beach lounges, and someone's made you a cocktail and there's a golf course over here. And that's the show at the end of the tour. Okay. And then you decide at the end of the tour to just swim over to this other deserted island. But what you got to remember is when you first arrived at that place, it was a deserted island as well. You built all that stuff, and you can build it again. I've never been perfect, and I've never done a show that's perfect, and I've certainly never done a first night of something that is perfect. So why am I getting so stressed that it won't be perfect on the first night?
There's this really wonderful paper about why, for instance, people engage in what's called the planning fallacy, why they think, oh, this will take, it'll take me X months to write this paper. It'll take us X years to build this building, whatever it is. And almost always it takes longer and it costs more, right? That's the planning fallacy. And Danny Kahneman and this guy, what's his first name? Lavallo is his last name, wrote this paper, and they talk about the inside view versus the outside view. And what it is that people often take the inside view, they just look at the reasons why this should be good, this will happen. And they don't take the outside view, which is that historical view, which is what you just did. Every time I've done a new show, it's never perfect the first time. Why should this be any different? But it's not in our nature to normally take the outside view and to do the record keeping and then to cross-reference our predictions against our records. And
so that's a good example of what I was, I guess, where I started on that, which was, what's my relationship with comedy? Mm-hmm. How am I, am I treating this rationally or irrationally? Yeah. And that was an example of me being irrational about something, that if I could just step away from it a little bit and go, this is what I need. I took a big break to work on this show because I knew this show, one of the things that stand-ups will tell you internally, they will tell you, is you don't stop. You got to keep doing it. Yeah. You get out of form really quickly, you lose your blah, blah, blah. And I think there's probably some value to that, particularly early on, But I've been doing this pretty much consistently for, I've probably done 200, 250 shows, and I'm talking most for the last sort of 15 years, hour-long, hour-long shows, not sets,
Yeah.
I think that sometimes if you don't get off the ride and step back and reconsider what your assets are, what you've learned, what it is you can now bring to the table, what you do is continue perhaps a growth or an evolution of what it is you're doing, but you don't do that thing of stepping back properly and almost letting yourself reset a bit and, go into something with a different energy. Last year's show was very much about the world, about my experiences of being a person living both in America and Australia and, in the light of, what had happened with Donald Trump and the election of him there but more broadly about the nature of, subjective and objective truth. I talked a lot about the anti-vaccine movement and these kind of harder political or socio-political issues, whereas this show I'm doing this year is a story. It's one story about something that happened to me.
Okay.
It would be silly of me to take the approach that I took for that previous show and just transplant that onto this show, the energy of performing it. I think sometimes when you are gigging all the time, I can take the energy off the end of the last tour, which is the show at its punchiest, everything's bang, bang, bang. Yeah. And then try to apply that to something that's learning where the funny bits are still. And I heard something about Chris Rock, which again might be one of those stories that's a bit apocryphal or someone's,
sure,
added a little to. But
when I interview him, I'll ask.
You can ask, yeah, exactly. But I hear that when he tests out material for the first time, he'll go to clubs and he'll just read it off
a yellow
notepad.
I've read that too.
And he'll read it in just in a normal voice like this, rather than adding the Chris Rock to it.
Yeah.
Because, the idea being that, well, once he adds the Chris Rock, you add the Chris Rock to almost anything, it sounds funny.
Yes.
You can certainly get it across the line. So what you can miss if you really don't give a show room to breathe at the start as well is that opportunity to find, those bits that you haven't already thought of.
Yeah,
the bits that you don't know. The listening bits, the bits where the audience tells you that there's something in your story that is more interesting to them than you thought it would be interesting to them. Because the things that are interesting to me may intersect with the things that are interesting to them. But Bill Burr, I was backstage at Largo one night, and I like to report this to people as if Bill Burr was giving me some great advice.
Okay.
But he was more generally holding court, and I just happened to be there in the room. But I'll take it. There's probably 2 or 3 other people who also tell the story about Bill Burr gave me this piece of advice. But he spoke. It was something that really resonated with me, and I was reminding myself of last night when I was having this mild sort of, overthinking of what it is that I'm doing. He said, if something funny happened to you and you wanted to tell your friends about it.
Yes.
He said, you don't sit in your car out the front of their house before the barbecue and, make a note and say, I'll talk about this first and then I'll do this and then I'll do this. He said, what you do is you start telling the story. And if they like the bit about the old lady, then you suddenly start describing the old lady more, and you lean into the bit about the old lady. If you get onto the thing about the short man, then they all kind of lose a bit. You know what happens when you tell that story? You drop the short man pretty quickly, don't you? And you move to the funny bit.
Yeah.
In your bedroom, in your office, in front of your computer, in the cafe, the old woman and the short man are equally important. Because to me, I can tell you why because I've tried to pick them both apart and, they're both to me funny and important. But the minute I start talking about it to the audience, they'll tell me which one is funnier and which one's more important.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I have a word of warning for you. There's recent research about young people and old people telling stories.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
And it goes something like this. So you ask young people to tell a story, then you ask them to tell it again, you ask them to tell it again, and it gets punchier.
They tighten it up.
Yeah. You ask older people to do that, it doesn't get tightened up.
It gets longer.
It might even get longer. And I don't know the theorizing behind it, but it probably has something to do with executive functioning and change and so on that happens developmentally.
Well, also, it probably, but I will say anecdotally, the best of all science.
Hard to disprove.
But one of the things that on radio we will never do is kind of ask someone for their dinner party story.
Okay.
Because if it's your dinner party, do you mean like something that you've clearly told a few times? Because every time you tell it, most people don't have, a set of dinner party stories. That funny story about that one or two things that happen. So the more you tell at a dinner party, the more you add in another bit, and that's your moment. So you revel in the moment. Younger people, you find, because they've been grown up in this age where you actually, Twitter, blah, 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 everything becomes shorter and shorter.
Mm-hmm.
They memify everything. There really is that temptation to take a complex issue and sum it all up in, with a picture of a frog.
Right.
I mean, anecdotally, I can definitely see that. It's part of the reason I don't try my material in front of, like this show, I do the first night, and that's the first time that I did a series of work in progress shows where I try a whole bunch of stuff, but as a show, the first time anyone will ever see this show is in front of 600 paying people, because I find trial shows or, those sort of things completely misleading, because I can't find a focus group that is like my audience.
I see.
So my audience, you walk in the door and there's going to be kids there who are, in their teens, and there's going to be people there in their 70s.
So
there's going to be everything in between. So if I go and try the material out on Tuesday night at Catfish Comedy, that's going to be young, millennial, hipster audience. That's great.
But they're not paying.
They're going to be some of my audience,
but
they're not going to be all of my audience. So you tell one of those jokes, like you said, that element of, what might be right for them. I might tighten a story. Say, for example, the way they responded to comedy was in the same way, which is they responded better to tighter, punchier jokes. I'm not saying that is the case, but just for the sake of this thought experiment.
Sure.
What I might be tempted to do by going and trialing the show there is then tighten that bit up to tighter, punchier jokes. But then when I go and tell that story in front of my audience, that might not actually be the best way to execute that story for that entire group of people.
Right.
Because that's the amazing thing about comedy, is that you're bringing a group of like really disparate strangers of all ages together. I mean, Billy Connolly was the first person I ever saw do stand-up, and I saw him at Hamer Hall with my mum when I was 17, and there was 3,000 people in the room, and they would have been, again, 14 to 70, and the thing that I found most amazing was that all these very different people, if you pretty much went out on the street and you grabbed any two of them and you asked them about an issue, that you wouldn't be able to find things in common with them.
Okay.
And yet in these moments, they are all united in this story. And Billy's a great example of someone who sometimes I can be tempted to go, hey, there's like 30 seconds here there's no laugh. It feels like forever. I'm on stage. I should put a joke in there.
Okay.
Whereas Connolly is a good example of someone, and Chappelle's a bit the same, where they'll do the hard work up front to give you all the information you need so that they can then bring that thing home stronger. And sometimes comedy can be a little like a pressure cooker. Chappelle sometimes doesn't let you let out any of the steam on the way. Sometimes if you have that joke or two on the way, you've almost let out the steam for the big punchline. And guys like Connolly and Chappelle are very good at going, no. I'm more than happy to, spend a minute or 2 minutes, 3 minutes to sketch out exactly what I'm saying, so that when I get to the bit where, I want to bring it all together, you are going to be, have the full picture painted, and you're going to enjoy that moment because you know what she looked like, or you knew that this guy had a beard. And even though that seems like an incidental detail, once I'm imagining this guy with this big beard, that's going to be better for the joke.
And then as an audience, you learn to trust these people.
Right.
Because they deliver. So I want to highlight an idea that I think is interesting about what you were saying is you have this sort of rational approach to life that goes as far as saying, I might use drugs to experiment with ideas, but I also might not do drugs to experiment with ideas, right? That is that like your approach is to learn more about the world and about yourself. And that if drugs and alcohol help you with that, you'll do that. If you find that they're getting in the way, or you don't know if they're in the way or not, then you'll give them up in order to do it.
Yeah, that's probably pretty accurate. You know, like
Am I romantic?
No, that's reasonably accurate. And and there have been times where that it has got in the way. That's where I did experimented with DMT a little bit, and for me that was like a mind-blowing experience, like it is with a whole bunch of people.
Yeah.
But I wasn't one of those people who then was like, I'm going to do DMT all the time.
Okay.
I was like, okay, well, here's a view of how the brain works, or what your brain is capable of, or the images that your brain can. If all it is a drug reacting with your brain, and then sure, I mean that's an interesting thing to have experienced. I'm glad that I have. And I feel like my brain and my perspective on the world is more rounded for knowing that. In the same way as I feel like my brain is you would not meet someone who considers, my worldview is that, we're a random accident in the corner of the universe.
Okay.
And then when I die, I'll be dead. But at the same time, I find life, the fact that if that is true, if what I believe is true, then why the fuck all this?
Yeah.
Why has it manifested itself in this way? And why do people believe all these different things? And where did these stories come from? And what can I learn about the experience of being a human being from trying this, or listening to this person's perspective on this? Or like, I think that it's funny because this is probably a weird thing I'm very certain of what I believe. Okay. But I am not a person. My favorite conversations are sitting down and talking to someone who thinks that life is about something different to me.
I see.
Like I'm fascinated by what other people think life is about, because the truth of it is I think it's a bit unknowable. So I love the idea that we've all got a theory. Yeah. There's some theories that I think probably make more sense than others, but there's an aspect of just like, what is this, and why is this happening?
Yeah, so as you've been talking, I'm one of the things that you're sort of alluding to in terms of the way you kind of approach your work is, so in academia, one of the nice things about being an academic is you get sabbaticals. So you're actually allowed to release yourself from the day-to-day, go to another place. And it's designed in many ways to open your mind to new ideas. You're supposed to read things that you wouldn't normally read, meet people that you wouldn't normally meet, work on ideas that you wouldn't normally work on. This trip to Melbourne for me is not a sabbatical, but it's serving some of that function because it's long enough that I'm away. I've been reading this book called Sapiens, which is, it's making a little bit of a splash these days. And, it's a wide-ranging book, basically, about human history. So it's written by a historian, but then it brings into play biology and theology and so on. I think you get a kick out of it. But what's fascinating about that book is the author makes a case that wheat domesticated humans.
I have heard that theory.
Yes, it's a fascinating idea. It's a new one. I hadn't heard of it before. And as I listen to you, it's interesting because you come from a family of farmers, but your life is more like that of a hunter-gatherer in terms of the beats in your day, the fact that you move around a lot, and that you don't have to, in the same way that a hunter-gatherer needs to work to eat, but doesn't need to be up at 5 in that way. But that book talks about a lot of the kinds of things that it sounds like you've been puzzling over and thinking about in terms of what is all this for, and what is it that we know for sure, and what is it that we don't know. And one of the themes is just how big the role of imagination is in Homo sapiens. Like, it is the thing that makes us different than any other animal, and even other humans that used to exist.
I mean, it's a great luxury. I mean, I enjoy thinking about the world. And I often, sometimes you have to pull yourself up, because you've got to be very aware that most people don't have the luxury to think about the world all the time.
Yes, that's true.
They've got to go to work and they've got to get their kids to school and they've got to, do what it is that they do. And they're not just sitting around a whole bunch just going, I wonder about this and I'm going to read a range of contrary opinions on this and then come to my informed opinion about what it is.
And then write a 400-page book about it on top of it.
People don't have the time to just, sit around and think about the world and contemplate the world. I mean,
And when they get home from work and finish feeding the family, they're so tired that they just plop down and sit in front of a television and watch incredibly entertaining shows.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's part of, not one thing draws you to, something.
Mm-hmm.
But people are often puzzled, I think, when because if you say that as a comedian that you don't want to be famous, because I'm pretty well known here.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a fact.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I can't. I would be being falsely modest if I pretended that wasn't the case. The greatest 8 years of my life were when I was in America and no one knew who I was.
Okay.
Because I was able to concentrate on the part of the job that I actually find the fascinating thing. We all come to things for different reasons.
Okay.
But I do as much thinking about, a set in front of 30 people who don't know me as I do about one in front of 3,000 people who do.
Okay.
The thinking's still the same. So you still get to do the fun bit. The having people know who you are bit isn't, for me, the bit of it that's interesting.
There's a downside to fame.
Well, it's not even that, because I don't even want to be I think there's a way that you can you can do this without that.
Okay.
I don't think the two have to be intrinsically linked. You want as many people as you possibly want to come and see your shows.
Yes, that's true.
But more the reason I say that is, that's not to say there aren't a million other compelling reasons that I like to do this. The things that motivate me to do this, on a really, really basic level, this is 100% the best way with the talents that I have that I can pay my bills.
Yeah, okay.
There is absolutely no doubt about that. I have chosen based on the, talents, what they may be that I have.
Mm-hmm.
This is the maximization of my potential in regard to, using that. There is nothing, I am not wasting some other great talent by doing this as a living. So on a very basic level, this is just the easiest way for me to pay my mortgage,
right.
But if it's going to be that, then I would love it to be something more than that, which is, so how then do I find meaning in something, in my work, in the world, through my work? But the great luxury of comedy is that not only do I get the opportunity to explore the world through my work, but I get an opportunity to check in with myself every year and go, where are you at?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think now that you didn't used to think? How have things changed? Who are you compared to who you used to be? And I have to, because I have to write a new show every year and I have to talk about these things. Most people don't, have that enforced thing on them to go, hey, maybe they'll go to a wellness retreat or they'll, go to a meeting or they do whatever, right? But it's an inbuilt part of my job to have the luxury to do that. Can there be a downside to that? If something really big does happen, can you then over process it? Of course. I mean, that's the other side of that. But I think it's actually to me, if I was going to tell you what to me, the performance is the end result that justifies most of it that I like, which is the sitting around and thinking about it and coming up with the ideas and trying to construct the ideas and, imagine what it will be. And then I love the performing of it, obviously, once you've done it to show it. But honestly, if you told me today that I had for whatever reason, all the festivals have been postponed for another 6 months, and you can just go away and potter around on your show for another 6 months and think about what you want to talk about for another 6 months, I'd be wrapped.
Yeah. That's, it's interesting me thinking about the parallels between, comedy and academia don't normally feel parallel to me, but talking to you, it does. That is that I have to write papers, right? So I have to deliver papers and they have to be outstanding in order for them to get published. And that's rewards come with that, so that differentiates good scholars from not good scholars. But what I do is I just enjoy sitting around and writing the papers. It's not, when the paper finally gets in, it's kind of like, okay, that's nice. But that enjoyment day to day. And I think that even if I stop being an academic, I would just still want to write and think and do that, because now that's rewarding in and of itself. So I want to wrap with a few lighter things.
Go for it.
So you use your name in kind of punny ways for your show, right? Goodwill, Will Communication, Kill Will, Jagged Little Will, Will of Fortune.
It's been 23 of them.
23 of those. Yeah. So what started this? Is there
American comedian called Wil Durst was out here doing the Melbourne Comedy Festival. It must have been 1996 or 7.
Okay.
And I just started doing stand-up.
Uh-huh.
Melbourne Comedy Festival is just one of the most brilliant, amazing things in the world.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be involved. So I went down to the comedy festival and I was volunteering, putting up posters and, whatever. And what they would do in return, I didn't realize back then, I felt so bestowed with the honor. But of course, what I realized in retrospect was that, it's good for them to have people that they can paper venues with if, one of their artists has press in and they need a few extra. But to me, it was great, getting free tickets to go and see comedy shows, Mm-hmm. So I went and saw this American comedian, Wil Durst, who's, still working, American political satirist.
Okay.
And I reckon he was doing a show called Myth America, it was called. But I ran into him in Edinburgh in 99, I'm going to say. Okay. And he was doing a show called The Durst Amendment.
Okay, nice.
And I spoke to him after the show. Mm-hmm. And I said, I came and saw your show in Australia and, I'm doing comedy here. I'm here in Edinburgh. Do you have any advice? Mm-hmm. And he said, well, always put your name in the title of the show. Then people will remember you. And he said, make it a pun if you want.
Okay.
And I thought that was a great bit of advice.
Yes.
Turns out, in retrospect, again, he was probably just trying to get rid of me so I could go and have a drink or something. But probably didn't want some young, idiotic comedy fan from Australia. But funnily enough, it came out of the idea of the structure of the year. So often these things, the backstory of them always, comes down to practicality rather than some great creative story. Mm-hmm. So generally for the Adelaide Festival, which is a February-March festival,
okay,
you probably need to be getting your program submissions and stuff in around August the previous year, July, August.
Okay.
So technically every year, about mid-tour of the tour that I'm doing, I will get a phone call from my management going, are you doing a new show next year? Yes.
Yes, of course.
What's it going to be called?
Right.
Now, at that point, I have no idea what the show will be. So the pun titles became a really effective way of going, great, I can just give them a title. It's not one of those things where it's going to be called 20 lessons I learned from my dad. Right. And then I get around to Adelaide Fringe and I realise my dad only taught me 17 things. Right. And I've got to really ruin.
You got to bury 3 in the middle. 3 bad ones in the middle.
Exactly. So it just always felt like a bit of a blank check. To tell the audience this will be a different show to last year. Yes. But I haven't really locked myself into anything that. But in the end, it's kind of become one of those things that, has become a reasonably good branding thing. That, it's a thing that people ask about and notice. And, in the lead up to doing a new show, people engage in what it might be called. And
do you get suggestions from people?
Oh, yeah. People always ask me, they go, okay, when will you run out of titles? I was like, people suggest them to me all the time. I said, I've got probably another 50 titles. I certainly do not have another 50 shows left in me. So I will die with a good 25 titles up my sleeve, and I will leave them in my will, 1L, to the other Will comedian or Phil who can have a go at them.
So your name is Will with 1L. Did you drop the L, or you've always
not
been Will?
Not me. My high school girlfriend, Beth English. Yeah, she used to. She
like,
was known.
It's an endearing thing.
I think she liked it. I think she thought it looked more like a name. Like Wil is a bit. It's a word and it's a.
Right.
It's not a name. But also over the years, I mean, Liam Gallagher's a William. He took the Liam bit. You know, and so I always liked the idea that I could split my name into two. That I was like Wil Anderson, but my full name named after both of my grandfathers. So William James Anderson is traditional as it can get.
Yeah. And
for me, it was my granddad was called Bill.
Okay.
And so I loved back then when I would pen things or write things, the idea that I had, if I split my name in half, I had two names. So I used to, Wil Anderson was my name, but if I wanted to write something under a sort of non-de-plume, it could be Liam James, which was the rest of my name. So, I mean, that was all high school stuff, when you're just mucking around doing high school stuff. But obviously by the time that I started doing this, it had well and truly stuck by them.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad I asked about that. So I had mentioned Sapiens as something that's caught my attention, and I'm somewhat obsessed with the book at this point. Is there anything you're reading, watching, listening to that really stands out that you feel a bit obsessed about?
It's interesting because I've been writing. I haven't been reading as much as perhaps that I ordinarily would be, but this will be an interesting book for international listeners, but I'm going to recommend something that's very specific, but I think that could be enjoyed by a whole bunch of different people. There's a brilliant writer from Australia called Martin Flanagan. He's a sports writer, but he's a long-form, literate, poetic sports writer. My football team that I support here, the Western Bulldogs, have not won a premiership, the grand final, the big thing in Australian football since 1954. I used to do a joke about if I'd wanted to watch a replay of the grand final, I would have had to wait another 2 years until television came to Australia. Okay. So it was that long ago. And so 2 years ago, and they're the Battler Club, the sort of, he's written a book about this year and the year that they won. That in itself may not be of interest to people. Okay. But the thing about the book that I found most fascinating, because I guess the thing that I'm most interested in at the moment is about perspective. Okay. My new show is all about one incident. I got arrested on a plane to Wagga Wagga. And, I was cleared of everything. It was a complete misunderstanding. But I was in the middle of something that had appeared, the same set of evidence through different sets of eyes had been interpreted in different ways. Okay. And I think that is quite a universal theme at the moment. The idea of, objective truth and subjective truth. The idea that we live in a world now where it's so easy for us to find evidence that suits our argument that our minds are almost attuned to that. And that idea that something is actually the truth, and are there things that are objectively true versus everybody's, perception of what happened. So the major theme that I'm exploring in the show is that idea of one incident viewed through a whole lot of different prisms, kind of trying to tell a, more universal story about that perhaps, where we are in the world right now is because of, the Trump thing and all that thing is because, people have chosen to, use truth in a very different way.
Yeah, self-serving, let's say. Yeah.
And I'm always fascinated by that as a topic because my comedy is by its very nature my story. So the very nature of what I do, of course, is self-serving. Mm-hmm. I am the person up there who, so to challenge my own perception, so what I'm trying to do within the context of the show is give an idea of, hey, this was my perception, but also then challenge my own perception of the same things, as a kind of idea about perhaps that this is something more broadly that, we should be more in the habit of, which is, so this book, which brings me back to this book. So it's an amazing thing because what he's done is recreated the story. And this is why it took him so long. It's taken him 2 years. But he's talked to, so you suddenly get to see this story. And, so you're on the morning of the grand final, for example, and each paragraph is flipping from one person to the next, whether it be some supporter who'd, been following the club for 100 years to the coach of the team to, whatever, these various different people. But what he's managed to do is recreate that one thing and tell the story of that thing, but through the various different eyes and perspectives of those moments.
Mm-hmm.
It's an incredible feat of, like, regardless of what it was about,
exposition,
the way that it's told, and the insight it gives you into that no one that day was experiencing the exact same thing. And no one, when they come to my show, when I do it, will experience the exact same thing.
Right.
There is some joy in, in that moment when you create something in a room. Why it works is because everybody saw the setup. Everybody just met Gary at the same time and found out he was a plumber at the same time. So the thing you say next, occurs to everybody else at the same time.
Right.
But then Gary's not going to think about that in the same way as everybody else thought about it. So even in that room, even in that moment,
there's someone with a different perspective.
Everyone's got a different perspective. Or the plumber who's heard that joke a million times, or the guy called Gary who's heard that a million times, or the Gary with 2 R's who doesn't like Gary with 1 R, or whatever it is. We're all constantly bringing our own perspective to the table. So the idea of, I think that's probably the thing that most interests me at the moment is this idea of that we are genuinely all, I guess it comes back to that idea I was talking to you about the meaning of life, religion, that sort of thing. People's theories behind that, which is, I'm not confident that I found out what the meaning for my life would be. And I am not the same person in the morning that I am in the nighttime. So that thing might not apply depending on the day. I am various different me's. There is a me who thinks I have a lot more time to read than the actual me, because I cannot walk past the airport bookshop without buying a book that potential me thinks he's going to have time to read at some stage.
Right.
This idea that we are all different people, even when we're experiencing the same thing.
Yes.
And what that means and how we unlock that in a way that we can still do what we necessarily need to do as human beings, which is work together, is a fascinating idea to me. Now, I don't have any, answers or whatever, but that is definitely the thing that's fascinating me the most at the moment, that idea of how different people can view the exact same thing in extremely different ways. And that's as fascinating as anything that's going on at the moment.
Yeah, I think and you're highlighting, you could have been a behavioral scientist. Actually.
Well, I'm comedians. I think there would be a few you could say that about, right?
But I think that could be your alternative life, because the things that you're talking about are things that psychologists have identified and tested and puzzled over, things like motivated reasoning. This idea that we're actually really good at coming up with supporting evidence for the things that we believe. And interestingly, the smartest people are the best at it. And so they become even more polarized in some ways, because they're really good at making arguments.
Well, I joked about it before, but it's true, which is that often I'm the worst person to ask about something about me. Because you're not going to get, I'll tell you what I think right now. If you tell me what were you like at high school? I'll tell you what I think I was like at high school through who I am now, and all the reframing that goes with that, one way or another. You're better off to ask someone who knew me when I was 15.
Yes.
They'll tell you what I was like when I was 15. I won't. I'll tell you whatever romantic reframing of that story that I've told over and over and shaped and spun and, but I don't even know, I'm a different person.
Yeah.
The cells of my body are different, my brain's different. It's almost impossible for me to give you an actual answer to any of those questions. So all you get is what modern me imagines those things were like.
Yeah, you get a story. It's sort of it's a game of telephone, but with yourself.
I'm taking those in the very, who knows if my rationalization the other night when I couldn't sleep, that the first night, it always will improve on, is that me going, no, that's good. You're a very sensible person these days and you can step back from that and you can understand that.
Right.
Or is that me finding a whole bunch of evidence to support the fact that it's going to be not as good on the first night? It's I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure there's any way that I could know. You try to acknowledge that is a thing that can happen, and then try to work out whether you're doing that or not.
Yes, I think that's right. Okay, last question. And the answer can't be hard work.
Okay.
All right. So what is the secret to success everybody knows but can't seem to do?
Working hard? No. No, it's easy. It's absolute easiest thing in the world. I can tell you this one, and this is the one that I do know.
Okay.
Fail as soon as you possibly can.
Okay.
And get comfortable with it as part of the process. If I could go back in time and give myself a piece of advice, it's the only one that I would give myself. Because you can tell yourself a million things of like, do this like this or do this like that. No. The only way you're going to learn almost all the time the important lessons is to fuck it up first, to make the mistake first. So get used to, have your failures as quick as possible. Get them out of the way in the dark. Learn how to deal with those failures before you're in a situation where it really matters. That's why in most jobs they only, I always joke that the idea of like comedy is such a weird job because like on the first day of you doing it, they let you do the same job as the person who's been doing it for 20 years.
Right. Yes.
Most jobs they don't let you operate the photocopier by yourself on the first day. You got to work yourself up to that.
Here's the microphone. Will.
It's not like it's not like first day on pilot school. They're like, we'll let you fly for 5 minutes. But we're going to give you a ride at 5. You've seen flying on YouTube, right?
Yeah, that's right. You've been a passenger on a plane a bunch of times.
Yeah, exactly. So fail. Okay. I mean, not fail on purpose, but put yourself in uncomfortable situations where you are challenged to succeed or fail, knowing that sometimes you will fail and you will probably learn as much. I'm not one of those people that's like, you learn more from failure than you do from success. They're both can teach you lessons. You need both.
Yin and yang. You need
one without the other is no good as well.
That's right, yeah.
But just at some stage you will fail. Every comedian in the world has done a shit gig, and every comedian in the world is one gig away from another shit gig. I was watching Seinfeld's comedian documentary the other night. It's such a great film. Yeah. And there's that moment in it, where like people are talking in the club and he just kind of is like, how big do you have to be? And it's like, well, that's it. Even Jerry Seinfeld's going to do a spot one night and people are going to be talking in the corner. Like that's the idea of comedy, is that, that failure comes, and at its best, failure is right there. Yeah. That's the great thing about that Chappelle thing where he's taking you all that way. It's like the more he builds the stakes, the more chance there is that
he loses
failure
people.
There at the end, right?
The reviews of that show are really mixed.
Really mixed.
They're
and
really
so
mixed.
Open yourself to the idea that firstly, just get over the fact that you want everybody to like what you do. Go to the internet. Think of the person you love the most in the entire world and you think is the most beloved in the world, and then type, that person is a dickhead into Google.
Actually, the more beloved they are, the more likely they're hated.
Right.
Those things go together.
Because if people are going to feel strongly about you one way, then it also, you are opening yourself up to the possibility they're going to feel very strongly about you the other way.
Again, I think that's yin and yang also.
And so just failure is the classic one. Just get used to it, have as much of it, go into it as being part of the experience and learn from it and embrace it and realize that it's teaching you something every time that it happens. No one in the history of comedy has ever done a gig so bad that everyone's got around and gone, you're not allowed to do comedy anymore. Right, it's a great job that way, You crash one plane, suddenly they're a little suspicious about you coming back up in the air.
Right,
comedy, you have a bad gig and you'll probably get material out of it and talk about it for 5 years. The other thing I was going to say, I know it's only one thing, but Stuart Lee in his book talked about the idea of the super fan. And I think this is also a really good way, which is, his thing, I reckon he said in his book was something
like the 1,000 true fans.
Right?
Yeah.
If you get 2,000 people paying $50 a year of something of yours, that's $100,000, right?
Yeah, you can pay the mortgage.
You can pay the mortgage. So it's one of those things where concentrate on the people who like you first and serve them and grow from there. Don't start with that idea that everyone's going to like you. Start with the idea that a few people might like you and build it outwards.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for doing this. I know, those great 8 years that you had in the United States, you didn't have people bugging you to do podcasts like this.
Oh, no. It's comedians in the United States. I was always being bugged to do podcasts.
Fair enough. But, I appreciate the time. This was really fun.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to visit petermcgraw.org for more information about our guest, show notes, and social media links. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with others. Join Dr. Peter